The central insight that drove the Protestant Reformation can be seen in Martin Luther's own heart. He was a very troubled person. He had a guilty conscience and was in such travail about this. There are stories of him reported to have been spilling the wine during the Eucharist because he's so fearful of God. And I actually think all people will be able to relate to that experience in some way or another. We all know what it's like to have a guilty conscience and that deep discomfort, which is very unpleasant. And I think in the secular world that we increasingly inhabit, that plays out differently, but I still think the same anxiety is there. And the good news, of course, is that there is a solution to this problem. That if the problem is a guilty conscience, the solution to this is salvation, and more specifically, the doctrine of justification, which simply means being made right with God. And this is what Luther came to understand from the book of Romans and drove so much of his life and so much of his theology and came into greater clarity for so many others in the wake of that. That I am made right with God just by believing. Works will then flow out of my life. And I am called to follow Jesus. Jesus said, this is something that sometimes Protestants today can underemphasize or misunderstand. Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey what I command. So we are called to obedience. We are called to grow in obedience throughout the course of our Christian life. But that obedience and that process of transformation within that the Holy Spirit is doing, that is not the ground of my relationship with God. And so much spiritual anxiety results from switching around my justification and my sanctification. So my justification is my initial standing before God, which is just by faith. And then sanctification is that process of growth in holiness throughout my life as a Christian. And it's so easy to get those switched around. So I think my justification is based on my sanctification, which is to say my status before God is based upon how I'm doing. And it's just the opposite. My sanctification flows out of my justification. And this is a word that I love to encourage hearts with. Bring all your anxieties before the gospel and allow Christ himself to speak his peace into your heart. Just like he says peace to the disciples when he appears to them after he's risen from the dead. He can do that to a modern, anxious, troubled heart. And there's lots of people in the world today, even secular people who maybe don't believe in God, but there's an anxiety within them, and even I think we can say a spiritual anxiety that is driven by justification by works. We may not think of it like that, but what is really going on is I'm trying to build my identity on what I do. It might be how much money I make or what kind of job I have, or it could be so many other things. But fundamentally, what makes me feel okay is my accomplishments. And the gospel is so counterintuitive. It's so different from not just other religions, but all other ways of life. And it's the happiest news we can imagine, that I am okay because of something completely outside of me. I think in a day where so many people are told to find happiness within, this is a wonderful message to be able to share with people. There's an exteriority to salvation. It's another person who's done it for you. And he merited it, so you don't have to. And I love to encourage Christians with this, to say this over and over to them. I need to preach it to my own heart over and over. When I forget and I become sluggish, and that anxiety comes back, and prayer is not flowing naturally because God feels distant, because it feels like there's storm clouds between God and myself, and I need to preach the gospel to my own heart. And I think all Christians need this reminder regularly. You are made right with God by simply believing the gospel. If it is sincere faith, then even though you still struggle with sin, you are clean. You are clothed in the righteousness of Christ. It's as though you're wearing white, shiny, heavenly garments. And that is how the Father looks at you. And therefore, if that doesn't flood your heart with joy, nothing can. Because to be made right with God means everything's going to be okay. That means heaven is thrown into the deal. That means even the suffering of our lives can be redeemed and turned to good. So justification is the happiest thing we can imagine. It's very relevant to our world today. It's what hearts need today. And thankfully, this came into greater clarity in the 16th century as through Luther's experience, but then others as well. Another example I'll give is Catherine Parr, who was the final of Henry VIII's wives, and eventually herself wrote a book about justification and developed Protestant sympathies. And she talked about the sweetness and the consolation of this doctrine. And if you read through what she's describing, the vocabulary she used reflects how justification should touch the heart and how it did touch many hearts in the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation. She's using words like sweetness and consolation and comfort. And she says, this makes me bold. The emotional language gives you something of what is going on in her heart, and anyone can experience that. That's one of the great things about the gospel, is it's for anyone, and it works for all problems. So today we want to share the gospel boldly, and we want to celebrate what happened in the Protestant Reformation that helped so many come to understand this precious truth.